Welcome to the Holocaust Center for Humanities Lunch and Learn program. I'm Alana Cohn-Kennedy, the CEO of the Holocaust Center. As people are logging in, please take a moment to let us know where you are from in the chat. If you have been to our museum area in our exhibit, where we highlight a few outstanding students who are upstanders, students who are working to better their communities in all kinds of ways, students who are standing up for others. These students exemplify the term upstander. We have added a few new individuals to our exhibit, and I want to introduce you to two of them. First is Bibi. Bibi is a sophomore at Shorewood High School in Shoreline. She leads her school's Latinx club, which is working to dispel misconceptions about Hispanic and Latino communities. She also tutors Shoreline elementary students from low-income backgrounds. Bibi herself is an immigrant from Colombia, and she understands the challenges many of her students face. She works to provide them with the support she wishes that she had received. Bibi's long-term goal is to launch a nonprofit to support newly arrived immigrants, and Bibi explains that she is inspired by the Holocaust Center for Humanities lessons on resilience, and she believes that being an upstander means uplifting others and advocating for change. Next, I want to introduce you to Liam. Liam is graduating this year from Interlake High School in Bellevue. And it's not often that you meet an 18-year-old who is single-handedly building a digital archive. But for Liam, the history is deeply personal. Since ninth grade, he has spent every family trip back to Poland going door to door to find interviewees who survived or witnessed the Holocaust. He records these untold histories, translates them, and shares them online as free resources for educators and students. From the dozens of interviews he has conducted, he notes that we can look back and see hatred across time. Far from being discouraged, Liam explains how others can combat hatred by taking the time to speak out against anti-Semitism and discourage the spread of misinformation. Liam joined the Holocaust Center in 2023 to testify in Olympia in favor of making Holocaust education a requirement in Washington state. He knows what we have to gain from these stories, that this history is everyone's history, and it's our responsibility to remember. These remarkable students, Liam and Bibi, are only two of the many incredible students inspired by learning about the Holocaust. And we invite you to come and visit the Holocaust Center and read more about these students and others. Special for the summer, we are going to be open every Thursday from 4 to 7 and every Sunday from 10 to 4. First Thursdays of each month are free. We have some exclusive temporary exhibits this summer, including one about a Turkish, Jewish, German family with a connection to Seattle, and another that features photographic glass artwork. You can check out our website for all of the details and the opening celebrations for each of these exhibits. We are living in a time when truth and facts seem to be subjective and open to interpretation, when the fight for freedom is noble to some and murderous for others. This is not new. We've seen this playbook throughout history. When I discussed this with Professor Raymond Sun from Washington State University, he understood exactly and proposed this presentation with the provocative title, Nazis as Freedom Fighters, an Alternative Lens on the Nazi Rise to Power. We have had the good fortune of working with Professor Ray Sun for many years. Ray is an associate professor in the Department of History at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington. Ray received his PhD in German history from the Johns Hopkins University in 1992, and that same year, he began his position at Washington State University. He's an award-winning instructor, and Ray is the department's specialist in the history of Nazi Germany. He also teaches and conducts research on genocide, the world wars, and traumatic memory. Ray is featured in a documentary about notable Holocaust survivor Carla Peppersack and has presented at countless conferences and workshops. Ray, thank you so much for joining us today. We are thrilled to have you, and I will hand it off to you.
Thank you, Alana, for that gracious introduction. I always love working with the Seattle Holocaust Center for Humanity, and I want to thank you for the important work that you do for public education and reaching out to the schools. It's really an invaluable resource for the state of Washington and indeed the entire Pacific Northwest. Talking about education, this is where I got the idea for this talk. As usual, I think the best learning comes when you have to teach, because then you find out what you do know and what you don't know. And new ideas come up in the course of trying to present challenging material to students. So the title Nazis as Freedom Fighters. Yes, it is very provocative, and deliberately so. But, I think Nazis would not find it um, controversial at all. And in fact, one of my central arguments will be that I think this is how the Nazis saw themselves. And this is not the answer, but it's an important part towards understanding how Nazis could conduct a genocidal racial war, and lead about the near destruction of European Jewry. So let me get started. And I will just make this full screen. Just a second. Okay. Okay. So Nazis as freedom fighters, an alternative lens on the Nazi rise to power. And we can start by, I'll ask the audience to simply absorb this image for a few moments. I'm going to break it down with you in a minute, but just let this settle in for a minute. For those of you who have done much work with looking at Nazi history, this will be a somewhat familiar image. But for many of you, it may be a little different, it may be surprising, maybe even shocking. Um, so take that in. Think about what is symbolized here and how this might speak to a German audience in the 1920s or 1930s. So here's before I go into the details, here's the overall arc of the argument that I'll be trying to make. So first off, I want to make clear that, of course, uh, in our view, looking back now 80 to 90 years, we think in this country, most of us think of Nazi Germany as a fascist regime, a racist regime, and a genocidal regime, and it was all of these things. I want to make that absolutely clear from the start that we're talking about a fascist, racist, and genocidal regime. But the question, which then comes up, is how then could the Nazis come to power? And this, I think, is the running theme for the summer, at least part of the summer series that the Holocaust Center is doing. How could the Nazis come to power? And the Nazis came to power in a free election, and they received by World War II, the Nazi regime had the support of the great majority of the German people, not 100%, but a great majority of them. And so the question is why? Because by the time we get to the eve of the Holocaust, and the start of World War II, this is a very popular regime. It is certainly a legitimate regime. And why is this the case? And so there's a variety of factors always. And what I'm going to offer is simply one aspect, which in my previous teaching, I didn't highlight as much because I was younger and dumber then. And I've thought a little bit more about it. But I'm not sure how much it's really highlighted in usual textbook explanations about the rise of Nazi Germany. And I think it's really important to get to this point about the power of language and the power of image is that even the Nazis, or maybe especially the Nazis, could not rely just on brute force, coercion, or hate messaging. Now, they did a lot of this, okay? Absolutely. They used political violence in a very strategic way. Their messaging was full of hatred and animosity and destructiveness against all sorts of targets, ranging from Democrats to Marxists to, of course, Jews. But it's not enough for a regime to win sufficient electoral support and enough popular support just on negative, destructive messaging. Because most people don't go to the ballot box and say, I think I want to show that I am also a racist, fascist, genocidal, murderer. That just doesn't work. People need to feel good about themselves. They need to believe that what they are doing is true and right and morally uplifting and on the right side of history. And this is where the issue of language comes in. And so when we look at Nazi language, Nazi speak, all right, the rhetoric that Nazis use to describe themselves and their agenda and their goals and their vision for making Germany great again, um, they had to convey also a very positive message. And that positive message, one of the pillars, one of the core arguments of that positive message is that Nazism uh, stands for freedom. I'll say that again, that Nazism stands for freedom, and that embracing to become a Nazi, to embrace Nazi ideology, is an act of righteousness. Okay, and I think that's hard to remember or to grasp from the distance of post-World War II, post-Holocaust, 2020s America or most of the rest of the world. But this is the reality which the Nazis worked very hard to construct. And they did so effectively. And language and imaging and branding is a very important part of their toolkit to do this. So I'm going to be focusing on the concept of freedom and how Nazis used the word freedom very effectively, both tactically and strategically, to paint themselves as a morally good movement who is fighting for all the right reasons against very dark enemies. If we're going to do this, of course, if we're going to look at the concept of freedom, of course, we have to think about what freedom means. And we can go more into this in the Q&A, I'm sure, but I'm going to be acknowledging that if we take freedom and the Nazis portray themselves as freedom fighters as a core part of their political strategy, we have to redefine what freedom means. So freedom in the Nazi sense does not mean guarantees of individual liberties and freedom and equality for everyone. Freedom is applied selectively only to certain groups which qualify. In the Nazi case, this is only to racially qualified Germans. And the concept of freedom also is not about individual rights. Quite the contrary. True freedom in the Nazi sense derives from subordinating your individual rights, which Nazis can denigrate as being selfish and egotistical and destructive, subordinating individual rights to the greater freedom that you find in subordinating your individual needs and desires and rights to the greater good, the greater community, whether that's the state or the Nazi German racial community. So we would sacrifice what we in the United States and in the Western world understand as individual freedoms, but in exchange you get true freedom and security and the satisfaction of knowing that you are giving up unselfishly of your own to serve the greater good. So that's the argument in a nutshell. Hopefully, I can bring this through some more granular analysis. So let's go back to the image that we were looking at before. And so the image that we opened with is actually from a Nazi propaganda poster. We know it's from the 1920s. I think the mid 1920s. I could not find an exact date on it, but let's look at what we have here. So we have that the eagle, first off, is important. The eagle was the national bird for the Nazis, right? So is part just like the eagle, the bald eagle is America's national symbol. So an eagle was represented Germany uh, under the Nazis. And so we have the German eagle, and I'm sure you've noticed, and perhaps you can see my cursor here. You can see a chain, and this is a broken chain, uh, and the eagle is about to fly off. And I'm sure you have figured this out. This poster is made for very low letter levels of education and literacy. We see a rising sun. And this, of course, is the swastika. So, in a sense, the Nazis have co-opted the sun itself. They're masters of the universe. But we see a rising sun shedding light and benevolence and goodness, and of course, freedom over a German landscape. You saw the contrast between light and dark, the broken chain, the eagle flying into the sunrise, and the sunrise, symbolically representing the sun shines again in Germany to under the Nazis under the swastika. Okay, so this is actually cram-packed full of symbolic meaning. And all of this, you get all of this if you support the Nazis and because they are going to liberate Germany. So the first question that we need to run through is, what are we being liberated from? And what's all this with needing to break the chain? Why is Germany dark until the Nazi sun rises? And there's several core arguments that the Nazis would make. The first thing to liberate Germany from is political humiliation. So Germany lost World War I after an epic and costly and extremely destructive 4-year struggle. They lost in late 1918, and they didn't just lose a war. They lost their empire. They lost their regime. The German Empire was replaced, was swept out of power. The catalyst was a socialist revolution that founded a Western-style democracy. We call it the Weimar Republic. However, that means that democracy is forever, for nationalists and conservatives, forever associated with national humiliation, defeat, socialism, revolution, and the destruction of everything they'd known. Tied to that is an extremely punitive peace treaty that was signed in 1919 that officially ends the war between Germany and the Western Allies. This is known as the Versailles Treaty, for where it was signed in the palace outside of Paris. So we're freeing Germany from political defeat and humiliation and impotence. Secondly, we're freeing Germany from repeated economic crises. All right, so most most notably the 1923 hyperinflation, when the German currency was not literally not worth the paper is not worth the value it was printed on. So at the height of hyperinflation in November 1923, it took 4.3 trillion German marks to buy $1. Right, and the economy is unsustainable at this point, and this devastated many people. As you can imagine, wipes out savings, turns the rules of working hard and saving and obeying the rules upside down. And then the Great Depression of 1929 to 33, which leads to 30% unemployment, uh, social gridlock and chaos, and opens the door for the Nazi rise to power. Um, And during the 1920s, Germany undergoes rapid and radical cultural change. Everything from gender roles, expressions of gender identity, changing sexual mores, high use of drugs, experimentation with drugs. There's a drug culture in the major cities. Women take new roles in the workplace and politics, and so for conservatives, this is a catastrophic destruction of all that they held to be good and true. And so, of course, Nazis tie all of these together. They are all connected one to each other, and all of this leads, most importantly, this is the bottom line, that Nazis believe in, but they also manipulate and generate and create existential fears for Germany's very existence, Germany's existence as a nation, and Germany's existence, Germany's future as a race. And most of you coming into a Holocaust Center uh, session probably know that the Nazis were all about racial purity, and they had hysterical fears about the corruption of the German race. And this is their ultimate fear, and the ultimate source of freedom is from the Jews. Now, I'm not going to be showing a lot of German anti-Semitic propaganda. It's hateful and denigrating, uh, but for the purposes of this educational talk, we are going to show this one. Obviously, this is a caricature, but it's a very symbolically and educationally rich caricature of what the Nazis called the eternal Jew. And the even the title, The Eternal Jew, speaks to the doctrine of scientific racism, which fueled Nazi racial ideology. And this arises especially in the 19th century and blows over into the first half of the 20th century. And this is a very exhaustive topic, but very briefly, scientific racism holds that race defines the world. Race drives world history. Um, Races are globally arranged hierarchically, so there are superior races and inferior races, and races are competitive in the spirit of social Darwinism, that races are in eternal struggle for resources to survive. And so races either flourish or die. There is no getting along. There is no room for toleration. Really importantly, races are who you are as a race is locked in. This is really bad biology and genetics, okay? But the Nazis would argue that racial traits are inheritable and unchangeable, immutable. So if you're Asian, you will always be typically Asian. If you're African American, or if you're African, you will be typically African, and so on. And so to call Jews the eternal Jew speaks to this belief that a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. They will always be this, no matter how much they attempt to assimilate. German Jews were very highly assimilated, generally very highly educated, loved classical education, served in the military, were productive and contributing citizens. None of that matters to the Nazis. This is what the Jew is like. And so we need to distinguish this, I think, from earlier versions of hatred against Jews, Christian anti-Judaism, which is hatred against Jews as members of a foreign and competitive religion. But if Jews convert from Judaism to Christianity, then problem solved theoretically. Scientific racism, racialized anti-Semitism says there's no escape hatch. So Jews are permanent aliens within the German nation. They are denigrated as parasites. They will never belong. They have no real role. They simply survive by sucking wealth and resources from others and by polluting the racial purity of the Germans. Jews are a separate race with the hereditary traits that are shown here. So Jews are greedy, Jews are communists, Jews are tyrannical, Jews are dirty, Jews are alien, Jews are threatening, Jews are corrupt. And so this is the ultimate liberation, of course, that the Nazis will promise and eventually attempt to carry out through genocide, what we now know as the Holocaust or the Shoah. Further on, you see in this image, Jews can be both capitalists, the classic symbol of the money changer being greedy for money, and communists with the communist hammer and sickle on the map of Germany. They are demonically strong, even as we laugh at them. So we laugh at them, but we're afraid of them. They're weak, but they're all powerful. It's incoherent, all right, but that doesn't matter. This is an irrational but very emotionally powerful argument. So the argument is that Jews are destroying the German people from within. The Nazi term is that there's blood poisoning, and we need to restore the purity of the German people. And if you want evidence, just look at the political, economic, and political chaos and corruption around us. Okay, so now we're looking at, I'm going to turn to Nazi uses of the term freedom, Freiheit in German. We can see here, this is an early a poster for an early Nazi party rally. They held annual party rallies in September, August, September of every year. This is basically a week-long political um, pep rally where the very best Nazis are invited to meet and greet the leaders and to reinstill the faith in the movement. What's really important here, I think, is the imagery of carrying the torch, a Nazi, and this is a hyper-masculinized, it's a very typical Nazi, hyper-masculine image of, Nazism ready to do battle. This guy is not he's not smiling, he's not having a good time. This is the ultimate, street fighter warrior image of hyper-masculinized Nazism, literally wearing Nazism on his chest. But what is he fighting for? He's fighting for freedom. Okay, and so he's fighting for something good, right? Who can be against freedom? Other examples, pre-1933, 1933 is when the Nazis come to power. Other examples of what the Nazi use of freedom to target different demographics. These are campaign posters, and we know it's pre-1930. September of 1930 is when the Nazis make their big electoral breakout to become at that point, the second largest party in Germany. Before that, they're listed as party number 9 or party number 8. Not quite so impressive. But we see here they're targeting rural voters, all right, farmers, who would become one of the core constituencies of Nazism. And the message is very simple: freedom and bread. Freiheit und Brot. We see the swastika, the racialized symbol of Nazism above ripe wheat fields just waiting to be harvested. This is a Nazi promise. So this is during the time of need. So bread as the symbol for being economically secure, but freedom. And I think if we look carefully, likely the swastika is superimposed in what I think is a tractor coming over this. So, modernity and progress. But freedom is tied to bread. Okay, so freedom is tied to having your basic needs met. Again, the Nazi concept of freedom. So Nazis are good. Nazis are working to make sure that you have bread on your table and that you are quote unquote free. A similar poster here says work, freedom, and bread. This is during the time of economic crisis, unemployment. So you'll have a job, you'll have wages, you'll have freedom, and you'll have your daily bread. And again, a very typical, German farmer slash peasant image, a strong male, racially pure. So all of these images all of these concepts and messages are being tied together, but freedom and freedom and bread being the connecting thread. Here's where the Nazis are targeting industrial workers. Okay, so urban workers, very different from the farmers. So, but here we see a German worker towering over, corrupt and alien oppositions figures, tiny little dwarf-like figures that attempt to seduce them. And again, the slogans here. So I've translated this poster for you here. We're building up. Our building blocks are work, Arbeit, freedom, right here and breads. And so I think this is all stacked together. Literally, they're all tied together in what the Nazis promised to give you. They give you a job, they give you your food, and they will give you quote unquote freedom. Okay, so and here's the empty promises of the others, to, dismantle the civil service, reducing social welfare, corruption, terror, agitation, and lies. Um, that's why you should vote for the National Socialists. Okay. So freedom as literally a centerpiece of the Nazi campaign promises. Freedom from communism. This was huge for the Nazis. Nazis were obsessed with communism, the threat of a communist revolution. And this poster comes from World War II, but it is an ongoing theme for Nazis. And the poster reads, Germany's victory, Europe's freedom. And I'm sure if this were a class, I would ask the students to deconstruct the image for us. And they always have numerous insights. It's a very rich image. We have a German soldier literally summoning lightning bolts down to destroy the beast, the dragon of communism. Many of you know that the symbol of the SS, which is the Nazi racial and political elite and a military elite during World War II, and the SS ran the secret police, the concentration camps, and the death camps, that their symbol were images of lightning bolts. Okay, so that is conjuring these lightning bolts. This is instantaneous and immense destruction that the German soldier, probably the SS soldier, can bring down, can rain down, literally summon down from heaven. So it's godlike powers right here. Um, in Nazi speak, in Nazi language. This is a continuation against what the Nazis called Judeo-Bolshevism, which is communism. All right, so the Nazis almost always use this hyphenated noun, this compound noun. So Bolshevism is another name for communism, but the Nazis a core Nazi belief is that communism is a Jewish creation. It's part of the Jewish conspiracy to destroy Germany and the powers of the world and to control the world for themselves. So Judeo-Bolshevism is what means that Jews and communists, Jews and Bolsheviks, Jews and Marxists are one and the same. And so we need to destroy them. And so that means freedom. So this is why, given the context of a wartime propaganda poster, a German victory in World War II would be good for Europe. It would be good for humanity because it would mean freedom from communism. Okay, so this is a positive goal to rally around. Okay, so freedom means we are destroying the enemies of not just Germans, but of all humanity. What is not to like with that? The word freedom also comes up in some extremely important musical pieces that were staples of Nazi party life and Nazi culture. The Nazis were extremely good at using spectacle, visual imagery, and oral senses, sound, music, especially at creating easily memorable, catchy melodies with simple, inspiring lyrics in order to brand their movement and to win popular following. So the first of these examples comes from what was basically the Nazi party anthem, the Horst Wessel song. This celebrates the SA, the Sturmabteilung, which is the storm division, the storm units, which are the stormtroopers. And this poster here reads National Socialism, the organized will of the nation, shows Nazi stormtroopers. You may also know of them as brown shirts. This was the paramilitary, the mass paramilitary wing of the Nazi movement that was instrumental in Nazis controlling public spaces and creating political theater and employing a very calculated and strategic use of political violence against their enemies, especially against communists and socialists, to create an image of strength and imagery and strength and discipline, power, patriotism, the willingness to use force to gain their righteous goals. I am not going to play the song because I didn't want to be playing Nazi anthems in a public forum like this, but if you're interested, you can find the Horse Vessel song online. I've just selected, I think this is the second verse from this anthem. And so the German is up here. I will I'll read the German because you should hear it in the original, and then of course you have the translation there. So die Straße frei den braunen Bataillonen, die Straße frei dem Sturmabteilungsmann. Es schauen aufs Hakenkreuz voll Hoffnung schon Millionen. Der Tag für Freiheit und für Brot bricht an. So clear the streets to the brown battalions, clear the streets for the stormtrooper. Millions are already gazing full of hope at the swastika. Remember, this is before the destruction of World War II, before the Holocaust. We don't look at the swastika as a symbol of hope. The Nazis said it's a symbol of hope. Why? Because the day of freedom and bread, there we go again, freedom and bread is dawning. Okay, and this song was standard, it was obligatory at almost every significant Nazi function. The second example that I want to share with you is from the Hitler Youth Anthem, which is forwards, marching forward, attacking forwards. In German, it's vorwärts, vorwärts. The Hitler Youth was an extremely successful program that the Nazis organized to basically indoctrinate the future generations of Germany into Nazi ideology. It began as a quote unquote voluntary program, but there was immense social coercion to let your kids join, right? And in the Hitler Youth, both boys and girls, and this goes up till roughly age 18, would be instilled with Nazi ideology about race, about militarism, about serving Hitler and sacrificing yourself for the greater good, and all of this. By World War II, membership was over 90% because it became basically mandatory. Okay. Um, and I should note that the Hitler Youth did believe in Hitler and Nazism with all their hearts, with a few notable exceptions, because this is all they'd known. And among the last defenders of the Third Reich in Berlin in 1945 were members of the Hitler Youth. Maybe it's not surprising when we look at some of these verses. So this is the chorus from this anthem. Unsere Fahne flattert uns voran. In die Zukunft ziehen wir Mann für Mann. Wir marschieren für Hitler durch Nacht und durch Not. Mit der Fahne der Jugend für Freiheit und Brot. So there again. Our flag flies before us. We march into the future side by side. We are marching for Hitler through the night and distress with the flag of youth for freedom and bread. And what 12-year-old could not resist this? Okay, you are Germany's future. You are going to fight for Germany. You're willing to endure hardship and sacrifice because you're doing this for Hitler, you're doing this for Germany, and you're doing it in the name of freedom. Such a positive image. Again, freedom and bread as the language that is the consistent thread through Nazi self-branding. And the last case that I want to point to is the Nazis were clever, and they had also a gendered use of the term freedom, and they rolled back significant progress towards women's equality. Women gained political suffrage, political rights. They gained much more access to employment. They were legally protected under the law. This is under the Weimar Republic, under democracy. And their gender roles were changing, and their gender identities were changing, and everything from how they dressed to the freedoms that they took in social life. And of course, this horrified conservatives, it horrified Nazis. They thought that they called these false freedoms or fake freedoms, which they would call any civil liberty granted under a democratic constitution. They would call those fake freedoms. The freedoms of women equality, Nazis argued that these actually corrupted who women really were. They corrupted their true essence. They corrupted the essential nature of womanhood by taking women out of the house, by taking women away from their maternal role. And women, once they're out in the business world, in the public space, in politics, with greater access to social and personal freedoms, that this is going to corrupt them morally. And if women are corrupted morally, then this leads to the corruption of the race. So we need to roll back women's emancipation. The Nazi slogan about women, their women's policy was wrapped up in their slogan, emancipation from emancipation, which is clever. It's regressive, but clever. And the argument in this, of course, is that so-called democratic emancipation is destructive. Nazi emancipation, Nazi liberation. So this is the real Nazis liberation movement. The real freedom for women is lies in renouncing these so-called fake freedoms of politics and business and rights to education and going back to your true nature. So here's the argument that Nazi emancipation will restore women's true natures, and their true nature is to become wives and mothers. So this is real emancipation from the false freedoms of democracy, and this is what you get. And this is for any text on Nazi policy towards women, I think you're going to see this image. This is portraying emancipation from emancipation in the most romanticized and sentimental light. Uh, this is actually a propaganda piece in support of a pro-natalist Nazi social service called Mother and Child. We see um, the German woman happily restored to her true role. There's a halo around here. This is the sun, but it also looks like a halo. She's angelic. She's nursing an infant on a romanticized and perfect Germanic landscape, a farmer plowing with traditional horse and plow in the background, the church, of course. And so again, this is how Nazi concepts of freedom are applied towards one specific group, towards women. We could take these examples further with other groups, but I think that this is one of the most striking and significant uses of the Nazi concept of emancipation. And so I wanted to share that here. So to sum up, um, I argued, I hope somewhat convincingly, that the rhetoric of freedom was essential for the Nazi rise to power, and it was essential to legitimize the Nazi regime. So in other words, when Germans vote for the Nazis, they're not thinking I'm voting for a racist police state. I am voting for the party of freedom. I am supporting our brave freedom fighters who are battling the communists. Okay, so to drape themselves with the mantle of freedom was essential towards creating the positive image and the sense of moral righteousness, which fueled much of the support for the Nazis, and of course fueled the Nazi self-image and their own ability to carry out racist and genocidal policies because they are morally upright. Um, the Nazis used language and images of freedom to create a positive and righteous identity for themselves and for their followers to buy into. The vast majority of Germans embraced this by 1939. Not at 1933, the Nazis did not have at least the electoral support of even half the German electorate in 1933, but by 1939, most of the population had subscribed to this. And I do want to point out that it's not as if people didn't know of concentration camps and secret police and repression. Okay, the Nazis publicized concentration camps to show off how they were restoring law and order to Germany, how they were taking criminal elements off the streets and quote unquote reforming and re-educating them. People knew that they had a police state. People knew that democratic freedoms had been eliminated. People knew that German Jews were being targeted on the basis of quote unquote race. But they accepted this for many reasons. But one of those key reasons is because they could say, but no, we're a party of freedom. And, those fake freedoms of democracy, we're happy to get rid of them because true freedom lies in embracing your role in this, in the Nazi racial community, the German racial community, the Volksgemeinschaft. And if you subordinate your individual selfish desires to serve the greater good, that's where true freedom and true fulfillment can be found. And I think with that, I know I'm out of time. So I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Ray, for this very informative presentation. Um, I want to start by just addressing many of the comments and questions that were coming in through the chat and a couple in the Q&A also. And those really have to do with the fact that what we're seeing now in our own country, people are wondering, do you see any similarities when you look at this history to those years in the 1930s? And one of the things that was specifically mentioned in the chat was the crackdown on the protests in LA and kind of this idea of, is a problem being manufactured in order to create something? And you were mentioning that in your presentation. So if you're comfortable, I wonder if you would address some of those comments and questions.
Sure, and I'm happy to address them. Um, and uh, you know what is happening in the second Trump administration is it's from a similar page. It's not the exact same page, but from a very similar page from an authoritarian playbook. All right. So, and again, I think we can look at the use of language as being essential to both the current MAGA movement, the Trumpian movement, um, and what the Nazis were doing in creating a positive brand. In both cases, we see the use of language to create both a very positive spin and image on policy, and to create a moral justification uh, for um, for those policies. So, um, of course, the Trump slogan is to make America great again, which the Nazi slogans were Germany awake, which is essentially to wake up, to throw off uh, the conditions of where you are. German freedom and liberation. If the Nazis are saying we need to be freed and liberated, we're obviously under the democratic regime. Well, we lack freedom. So just as Nazis could argue that we are the real freedom fighters, I would argue that to support MAGA, one believes, and I think this is a core message of the Trump administration and the Trump movement, is that they are the real patriots, that they are fighting for freedom. Uh, the use of language, although I didn't, when I talked about the Nazi use of the term freedom, a lot of it is freedom from fear of criminals. Nazis labeled groups that um, political enemies and racial enemies, they would label them as criminals. And so that justifies putting them into concentration camps and later eliminating them in genocidal race wars. And I think there are very clear parallels going on here. The first thing one has to do is to dehumanize and distance your target groups uh, by making them dangerous. That justifies either their political segregation, their expulsion, their their removal from society, and that can then be framed as a positive good. You're removing dangerous elements from society, they need to go. And again, I didn't touch on the concept of purity too much here, but the Nazi, just to stick with the theme here, the Nazi concept of freedom means freedom from, I guess I did touch on it. It means freedom from corrupting, impure, and alien elements who do not deserve to be there. In fact, they are an active threat. And I think that same concept is behind the Trump anti-immigration policy and attempts to deport um, undocumented um, immigrants now. In fact, in his campaign leading up to the 2024 election, Trump was basically paraphrasing Nazi language and talking about blood poisoning, or he made public statements about how our American blood is being poisoned, the society's blood is being poisoned, our culture is being corrupted. This is a paraphrase or a plagiarism of Nazi language, and implicit in this then is we will be free from these. So I think there is a concept right there.
Thank you. I wonder, in addition to that, in many of the early Nazi years, early 1930s, there were many Germans who were protesting the Nazi movement and their political ideas. And I wonder how, since, as you mentioned, the majority of Germans seemed to be on board by 1939, how did that political shift happen?
Um, yeah, there's a lot of factors, and part of it is the elimination of alternatives. All right, Germany became a one-party state. Um, it is a police state. A lot there is fear. There's no question about this. Coercion is a major part of this. No one wants to wind up in a concentration camp. Part of it is sustained indoctrination, whether through propaganda, whether through the classroom. Um, through imagery, through music, as I tried to point at various ways in which the Nazis could access the whole population. Um, there's various aspects of Nazi propaganda that work together. A powerful piece is the cult of Hitler, which is amazingly successful. Um, but I think, for the vast majority of people, the easiest path is that of compliance. That doesn't necessarily mean agreement, but compliance, which means after a certain point, resistance literally is futile, right? Or seems to be so. And to go along. And the Nazi messaging, especially before World War II and the early years, even the early years of World War II, when Germany was running the board with all of this. It is so seductive and so easy to believe that yes, this is a regime for freedom. Yes, this is a regime that is that is protecting us from the fears of communism and Jews, and and the chaos that democracy and so-called individual rights gave us. Okay, so the Nazis would always flip the question back, and so you say you don't, so you want freedom under in a democratic style. Well, look what democratic freedom brought us. It brought us hyperinflation. It brought us a depression. It brought us political incompetence. It brought us moral corruption. It brought us political disaster. You want that sort of freedom? I don't think so. And many Germans were very found that increasingly persuasive, especially given the real and manufactured victories that the Nazi regime produced between 1933 and let's say 1940 to 41 even.
So, Ray, there's another question here. It's kind of long, so I'm going to read it.
Okay.
And it asks, how much of this Nazi campaign for freedom depended on the education level? Um, you know what? Maybe I'll just leave it I'll leave it at that. It goes on to say the simple Volk, while being dismissive of those who were educated elite. It seems that there was an attempt to tap into a feeling of disenfranchisement and inferiority amongst the common folk.
So the core question is how much depended on education?
Yes.
Good question. The images, the examples of propaganda that I gave, whether the campaign posters or the song lyrics, they're aimed, that's the lowest common denominator. Okay, freedom and bread, freedom and bread, freedom and bread. The music is memorable. It's you can march to it, hum to it. So, so that is at the most common level. So much of this was at a very easy access. But I will say that, as many in the audience know, that Nazi elite, that many members of Nazi elite organizations were extremely highly educated. Um, I'm thinking specifically of members of the German, of the SS, okay, which, as I've said, is the political and racial elite and the driving force within Nazi Germany for both the police state and the Holocaust. And it's hard to become a member of the SS. And because it was an elite, it drew, I think, a disproportionate number of very educated Germans into it. You had lawyers, you had doctors, you had PhDs willing to serve, and they served in killing squads, and they served and they helped run the genocide. And so education is not necessarily protection against this rhetoric. Okay, because you can, you can no. And so while there are probably some individuals whose education did protect them and allowed them to very easily see the manipulative use of language, there are many who either didn't see that or were just fine with it. And this language, let me say, this language I've been focusing on is extremely ideological. It's a very ideological use of the concept of freedom, as is probably every concept of freedom, whether you like it or not. And other terms we can think of like security or community, any positive as virtue you can think of. Um, can have a political and ideological read. So all of this language is highly politicized, and therefore, even a highly educated person, if they are ideologically inclined, can easily create buy into this. I'll keep it short. I'll just buy into this.
Ray, I'm realizing we are just about out of time. So, are there, in the last 30 seconds or minute, is there one thing that you'd like us to take away specifically from this presentation, or one last thing you want to leave us with?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that part of the reason I offered to give this session was because we need to be critical about the use of language in everyday language, but especially in political rhetoric and in policy. It's not just a Nazi thing. So I found it to be an aspect of teaching Nazi history I hadn't emphasized much before the last year or so, and I'm kicking myself for not doing so. But I think this is really part of their appeal. And obviously, we need to apply these same critical thinking skills to understanding our current political and social climate.
Thank you so, so much for being part of this program today and for all of your great work. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. It was an honor. Appreciate it.
Thank you to everyone who joined in this program today. This Lunch and Learn program is our 128th virtual Lunch and Learn. We started this program during COVID back in April of 2020. And I, along with our technology director, Richard Green, kept the programs going at that time at the rapid fire pace of one a week for over a year. And I know some of you attending today were participating in those early programs. We learned a lot along the way. The first ones were a little rough, as some of you might remember, and there were always surprises, but the presenters consistently congratulated us on our organization and smooth running programs. This, of course, was in large part because of Richard Green, who is constantly working on all of the details behind the scenes. And while I'm talking, he is watching the program on at least 3 different computers and troubleshooting anything and everything as it comes up. I tell you all of this now because this program, number 128, is how Richard is choosing to celebrate his last day with us here at the Holocaust Center before officially retiring and hitting the hiking trails. So thank you so much, Richard. Richard, will you pop on the screen for a moment so we can all thank you? Thank you so much, Richard, for all of your work for these Lunch and Learns over the last few years. We're really, really grateful. We have a very capable team stepping in, and while we are taking the summer off, mark your calendars for our next Lunch and Learn program with Professor Beth Greek-Palelli. Some of you have heard her before. She's going to be joining us for What History Teaches, Scapegoating, and the Politics of Othering. The September program is one in a series of programs that we are offering in partnership with other Holocaust organizations around the country. So if you don't want to wait until September for your next Lunch and Learn program, check out the full series of What History Teaches on our website, because the series actually starts this month. If you find our programming interesting and meaningful, please consider making a donation. Your support is what powers this organization and makes this work possible. You'll find a link on our website, of course. All of this work is possible because of our very dedicated team at the Holocaust Center. In addition to Richard, who you just saw, I want to thank Jessica Michaels, Paul Regelbrug, Brenda Anderson, Lori Werschel-Cohen, Lexi Jason, Charlotte Campbell, Lisa Spink, Michael Langberg, Arlene Lugtu, Jess Alley, Mario Felipe Bamonte, Rosa Campos, Cheryl Harmon, and our newest member, welcome, Cameron Zorb. Thank you also to the Conference on Material Claims Against Germany for their support of this program. And thank you to all of you for watching today and for being such a great audience and all of your involvement in the chat. I look forward to seeing you at our next Lunch and Learn program in September, if not sooner, and maybe even in our museum. Thank you so much. This concludes our program for today.